Hello and welcome everybody to Lorelines episode 85. I hope you're all having a great week. We are joined this week by Rook. Welcome back, Rook. It's good to have you back.
Thanks so much. I was really excited to get the invite to come back. And even though I have a slightly different appearance, thanks again for working out the new avatar. It'll still be, hopefully, the same me, the same excitement for lore, and the same great conversation as last time.
Absolutely. It will always be the same you, whoever that may be. We will be talking about LGBTQIA plus inclusion in the world of Final Fantasy XIV. Before we get to that, though, we just want to cover some current events, see how everybody's been doing, and catch up. I know it's been a while for some of you here, and we're glad to see you. Sarah, how have you been?
It's been busy being a PhD student and having to balance that with just, having a life outside of school too. We're doing a lot of writing. I am
Awesome.
enjoying it though.
Well, that's good. I'm glad. Glad to hear it. Neela, how have you been?
I'm live kicking. I've been doing all right. I think I've mentioned on a previous show I hurt my thumb. It's been healing and then I went and smashed it yesterday, so now I'm
Oh
in a
no.
little bit of pain, but
Oh no.
uh, it's life. It's
Hugs.
not my mouse hand, so I'm okay.
That's what's important.
Absolutely. How about you, Arden? What have you been up to lately?
I have been playing the heck out of the new Destiny 2 expansion on pretty much any day that I am not still bashing my entire face into Dragon Song Ultimate. That has
Fun.
basically been my life, is swapping between Dragon Song Ultimate and shooting aliens in the face.
I like it. Which technically, the
Yep.
dragons are aliens too. So you've
Yeah.
just been
Yeah,
killing
true,
it.
Yeah.
true.
You got to take out your Dragon Song frustrations. I understand.
Yes, definitely. We're at 2,500 pulls on the nose for Dragon Song now.
Holy
Nice.
shit.
Woo.
And Ayumi, how have you been?
Who has two thumbs, no hair, and isn't going to FanFest? This
Oh,
guy.
No.
Oh, we know
Oh,
Xavier.
so no, I did want to briefly mention, that's a topic of discussion that FanFest invites did go out. So it's congratulations to everybody who got their invites, and general tickets go on sale on the 15th. So if you're still getting to go, just because you didn't get an email doesn't mean that you're out. So don't despair, please. Don't let Medion grab you.
There's been
I'm
a
already
little
halfway there.
despair here and there.
No, it's fine. Also, I know that LunarCon announced their dates for this year, so we're really excited about that and looking
Yeah.
forward to
I had fun last time.
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
LunaCon's
always a
been
good time.
great every time.
VidderCon is
Absolutely.
a blast, and it's great because, hey, you don't have to worry about tickets. You don't have to worry about in-person attendance, paying money for hotels, flights, anything. You can just attend in-game, and if you don't have a character somehow on one of the servers, you can always just make an alt and still do a lot of the events, so.
Depends on the congestion capacity.
Data
we
center
noticed.
traveling, world traveling helps at least.
Or you can plan ahead and do data center travel beforehand or make the character beforehand. Then you just gotta wait through the queue.
Yeah,
My
seriously.
advice would be to do what I did and just happen to have it be on your home server. Then you get priority.
Well planned. Well planned. All right.
No, I just got lucky. I love it.
So today we're going to be talking about LGBTQIA inclusion, what that looks like in the world of Final Fantasy XIV, and how that is reflected. So just to kind of set some ground rules, we're going to try and be keeping this strictly to the in-game lore of Final Fantasy XIV. We can talk about some tangentially out of game stuff, like some things that UCP might have said or how you personally feel. But mostly I want to try and stick to how does society treat and view people who are LGBTQIA plus, and what does that look like? What are some shortfalls? What are some things that can be improved? And I want to start off by asking, what are your favorite examples of inclusion in this game? What are things that really stand out to you and say, you know what, that is, I either see myself in that or I know someone like that. What does that look like to you? Rook, do you want to start?
Oh, geez, so much pressure. I'm so bad at picking favorites every single time.
Right?
I feel
I
that.
Oh, it's so hard. I mean, I think it's tough too in 14 because we have a lot of little snippets of representation. But when it comes to, what huge examples, what impactful main characters do we have, that I think it's a little bit tougher because they are a bit more ambiguous.
Hmm.
But I think there are a lot of great nods and a lot of great, like general kind of NPCs. And one of the things that I love culturally in the game are the Datharl tribe. I think that was such a great idea. Sadhu is fantastic as a character, and this idea of the Datharl reincarnating through different iterations of life. And because of that, I think having much more of a flexibility of their understanding of separation almost of spiritual being and just whatever body you were born into, I think is really interesting, and we get some really cool gender stuff because of that. Not to mention that Sadhu just is pretty obvious about being into women or stealing all of Magnai's women, which I'm super into.
Just thinking of Serena.
Yes, like
Yes.
her and Serena are so cute. I mean, while they haven't like straight up walked in front of us on the screen saying they're girlfriends, at this point, there's definitely been a lot of dialogue that kind of indicates that they are much closer than they once were and that they really seem to care about each other. But I think it's phenomenal, this idea that Sadhu as an entity can even remember past lives where maybe there was identification as like male or masculine, and then coming into this new body and new form. And I really like that a lot in the game. I think that's such a cool tidbit, and it gets me so curious lore-wise. Like, do they just have some kind of conscious understanding of the life stream? Do they, for some reason, as a tribe, retain ethereal genetic memory, and that's why even when they return to the ethereal sea, they don't lose or have all their memories wiped. I don't know. It's fascinating, but I love that piece of LGBT rep in the game.
All right, awesome. Anyone else wanna follow up with that?
I'll touch on it a little. That one is another big one that I like a lot, absolutely as well. I find something very beautiful about the concept of the soul, the person being disconnected in some ways from the body. You are not just your body; you are the soul inhabiting it. I like that they have that approach and that angle on it a lot.
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot. Sarah?
Honestly, the biggest things that have come up for me lately have been Charlayan, paradoxically, with its approach to like subtly having like a few characters who seem to identify more in like they them pronouns in more non-binary ways. Just
Yes.
having like very subtle things like that where if you're looking, you'll pick up on it. Like that cook lady in the Hamlet, the Charlayan Hamlet down in Labyrinthos, who was very much like using those kinds of pronouns, and you go to help them with that task, but it's something that just kind of comes up very briefly and just sort of like it isn't made a big deal out of, but you can still appreciate it if it's something that you're like gonna notice if you're that way. And also like there was that bench in Charlayan itself out by the coast with the two NPCs, the two incidental ones, and that one that's like thinking about what they're gonna have for like lunch or dinner or whatever. And the Lalafell that's with them is like they can't seem to ever make up their mind. And just like little things like that where it's like they're using they them pronouns and more of a non-binary presentation as like a very just like this is just how the world is. It's just normalized, and I find even just like little things like that to be such a lovely impact.
Awesome,
The,
awesome. Arden.
there was one in Elpis as well.
Oh, yes. And
Yeah,
Absolutely,
talk
Elvis
about
yes.
too.
Mhm.
Yes. I could go on and on about what I think the ancients do in that regard too, but
Right.
certainly like being able to see it at every time period just feels so nice.
Yeah, like if Hades can, transform into giant eldritch monster, I'm sure that they can transform their gender and sexual identity in very interesting ways.
Absolutely.
uh Things that stand out to me, like I don't know what it is with my brain, but the little just nods with the NPC speech bubbles like that, or just the little interactions have often stood out to me more than like, let's say, something more obvious like Reen and Gaia. For whatever reason, those little nods, just the little the little pronoun usage or whatever has been way more impactful to me than anything that's more overt.
Yeah.
But
If
something else I definitely appreciate is the ability to make more androgynous characters. The game definitely gave me a gender crisis, which is how
Oh,
we're here
absolutely.
today.
That's how I ended up the same way. Yeah, like
Yeah.
I know so many people who've transitioned because of this game, myself included.
I mean, in truth, I I met a community of people who were like me and who helped me understand who and what I am through this game.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's
same
amazing.
here.
If you don't mind, I'd like to touch a little on what you're saying about it just being like environmental. This is for me personally, I really enjoy that as well. I think that when you tell out, not to say there's anything wrong with the Reading Gaia quest line, and I think young love which isn't
Yeah.
necessarily like it can be touchy to some people, but people fall in love and they go on like a non-sexual date, and that doesn't have to be weird. It can be very sweet. But something like that is a nice storyline to have. It's cool to see it, but it also feels like, hey, look, we're doing this, we're doing this. Whereas when you just seed it into the background, when you just have it there and it's just like, this is ordinary, this is normal, it feels, it doesn't feel like, see, look, we're representing you. It just feels like we are just casually representing you. This is normal. This isn't unusual, and it's a good feeling. That's how I
Yeah,
perceive it
it
anyway.
feels more sincere. It feels less like queer baiting in
Yes.
that sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's tough because in many ways they are their most overt, I think, with their NPC and world ambiance. Like we'll have characters that just straight up, are saying like, yeah, this is my fiance, or they them pronouns, or the cute little couple with Wanderer's Palace, or the great little side quests. This is actually one of my favorite side quests recently that I stumbled across with the Ijin merchant in Kugane, who falls in love with the most beautiful actress he thinks he's ever seen, and then finds out that, like, lo and behold, in Kabuki, which I'm assuming it's drawing heavily upon, all the roles are played by men. So that beautiful woman is actually, is like outside of the theater, presents as a man and is a man. And he's like, oh, that's cool. I still think you're the most beautiful person I have ever seen. Would you like to go on dates with me anytime I'm in the city? And in like those ways, it's so overt. But when we get these like major characters, that like mention of queer baiting, I think is such a thing because it's hard. I mean, like everybody's saying, you don't want a character that feels like this was some ham-fisted attempt at representation. I mean, don't get me wrong. I will take a ham-fisted attempt over nothing,
Same.
but I think that the big problem is that a lot of times companies and game companies in particular get much more ambiguous when it comes to those main titular characters. And particularly with 14, like a lot of those quests are so sweet and Rin and Gaia are so sweet. But I think many of us that are part of the LGBT community are like, oh yeah, they're clearly girlfriends. But then you get into this kind of gray area as well, where I think many more people, unless it's overt to some degree, will argue against that or be like, wow, you're all being weird, like reading into this or stuff like that. So it's always tough because I think in many ways to make a big impact and a big statement outside of our own communities, you do have to have characters that are more featured and in the forefront and who, hey, are just living their lives like normal, but like are very obviously, queer in some way.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
it's tough because I think they are the most overt with side characters and they kind of shy away sometimes from representing that in the main cast.
They do tend to be less explicit. I agree. Honestly, I think one of the things Final Fantasy XIV does best is the ambient storytelling. Things like walking past an NPC and they spout a line of dialogue and, oh, I just learned something about this city, you know? They do that ambient storytelling, making it feel like a world very well.
Yeah, anytime I see an NPC that I can like actually like click on to talk to, I usually run by them several times or like stand by them for like a couple minutes because I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, do you have any interesting dialogue that you're just gonna
Impart
spout
to
at
me your
random intervals?
secrets.
I like this topic of conversation. I'm just letting you guys go.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm thinking about all the times I ran by every single ancient that doesn't actually like have any sort of interaction, but just to see
Yeah.
what their dialogue was. And my favorite one is that lady in Anagnorissus in front of the fountain who wants to raise like aquatic creatures in the fountain, and I'm just like, oh, that's so cute.
Oh, I actually loved that the topic about ancients came up in regards to their physical vessels and bodies, because part of the reason that I even had my character shift, or my avatar shift, as it were, is because for a long time I had been playing my main character, Valka, who is the Vieira avatar that I had the last time I was guesting here. And I loved her as a character, but she was just an RP character that I had, and it was always like weirdly dissonant. When you have an RP character that you then take through the main story and you're sitting there like,
Mhm.
oh, this character is definitely not the Warrior of Light, but we're just gonna pretend for now.
That's a mood.
It's
I
such a
played
weird
her on
thing.
Daniel.
Mhm.
Like, so eventually I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna make a character that is just my Warrior of Light. And like my RP partner and I can still roleplay with that specifically, but like they're just going to be my Warrior of Light. And so as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about those ties back to the ancients. And just like you were saying, the fact that the ancients literally could manipulate physical matter in so many ways, let alone shifting their forms into things like these guardian forces, if they had the capabilities, the power, these other selves, these true selves. I was immediately like, oh yeah, my character totally used to do that all the time. And when coming back from whatever shift, would just change their physical body or like change their physical gender. And, the they, them pronouns came in so smoothly from that. And although we don't see a ton of, like we get references, but we don't actually like see that playing out in the world of the ancients because we have such small snippets of it here or there. It does just flow so naturally as an extension of that world and setting and time period. And I was so excited to hear that other people were on the same page with that idea too,
for
that
sure.
headcanon.
I know
Yeah.
so many people who are queer who love the ancients and the Asians too, for that matter, because of that. Certainly, I do. Absolutely. Being able to like just change that stuff on a whim and have everybody be like, "All right, sweet."
Not to mention things like the soul sight being so precise that you can see and recognize each one is rare. But having a friend that always knows who you are by your soul,
Right.
well, this could explain why he's always using soul sight.
And
I'm
then
just saying.
and then it shows up as a color too. Like you get just
Mm.
imagine seeing like this rainbow, and it's like that's your bestie.
I still remember, I believe it was an interview with Yoshi P when they were asking about the ancients back in Shadowbringers, and were they male, were they female, and how he said that they were elements of both, and it didn't really matter. And when we got to know them a little bit better in Elpis, it really made sense with them being more about the soul than the shell of the soul, because when the body dies, it's gone, but the soul stays. It goes back to the ethereal sea. It's reborn, and it can be in any shell or container, but it's still that same person. And their relationships to me struck me as more as being about loving that person that they are, rather than what they look like or what container that they're in.
Oh my gosh, Cobran, you just made me remember my actual favorite representation. And I don't know how I forgot about this, given that it was the most
'Cause you
recent
got
thing
put
that
on the spot.
happened. So it just like it hit me when you were talking about that. Yes, the idea of like the entity being more important. Zero. We just recently had incredible confirmation about Zero. In the character design brief. The fact that Zero will say herself, they use she, her pronouns in the game. I tend to, in my own head, default to they, them for Zero,
Yeah,
but
Mhm.
I think a lot of
I,
people go they, she,
Oh yeah.
they.
yeah, she, they. But I, for like ages, when I was doing my playthroughs and things on YouTube, I was just like, well, that right there is an NB if I've ever seen one. It's like,
That's the same vibes I got too. Yeah.
Absolutely.
right? And I think I had like one person in a couple places that was like, how dare you say that this person is not binary? And I was like, I'm sorry if you don't know enough non-binary people to realize that whatever is going on there is for sure non-binary.
Yeah.
And then we got this amazing confirmation because there was already tidbits, right, where Zero talks about the fact that gender is irrelevant to them. Because although there's not this return to the ethereal sea like you were just talking about, Cobran, with the Void Sen, it's almost in fact the opposite, where they cannot return, and yet as they constantly reform, their bodies, their shells change. And then we also recently had confirmation from the character designer that the character brief for Zero said a beauty that transcends gender, neither female nor male, like neither feminine nor masculine, and somewhere in between that, reads either way. And it was the most satisfying moment where I think many of us were just like, yep, we done been knowed. Yeah, no, we knew that.
Absolutely.
But I love
That means
Zero.
they did a good job on it, though. They did a really good job, because I know I was not the only one who glanced at Zero and was like, huh, strong they vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the moment I
So
think we saw
they did it up right.
they did it. Yeah.
Zero's fantastic.
Zero's so good.
Too bad their clothes are so dark. Otherwise, that'd be a cosplay option for me at FanFest. But I don't want to roast.
Yeah, Vegas heat is no joke.
Yeah, I'm just like anything that's dark clothes. I'm not doing it. No, I can't. I can barely stand over 70-degree weather. It's just not happening.
I do like me some Zero. They are pretty awesome, and when that confirmation that they were androgynous came out, I was actually really happy about that, because I don't know. I'm full disclosure, I'm het cis, but I like inclusion. I like seeing everybody be able to enjoy and be included in the same thing. So when I saw that, I was like, that is really cool. I like that. And it's one of those things where it didn't feel like baiting. And I know that that's an issue for a lot of people, but for me, it just felt so natural and such a natural evolution of the character. And I was like, that's perfect. That's how I like to see that.
I think one thing that helps with Final Fantasy as a whole is they've always been really good with androgynous designs. Like, growing up playing Final Fantasy, there were so many times where my family was just like, is that a guy or a girl when looking at antagonists in Final Fantasy? And I'm just like, yeah, this seems like the natural evolution for the Final Fantasy franchise is just be more blatantly androgynous or non-binary.
How dare you call Kuja out like that?
I do love this though, because I think so often we see that with male characters in particular, and yet like hyperfeminization is still something that oftentimes across the board in Final Fantasy happens. And I think there was even an interview with Yoshi P, I think it was him, where he was saying that he was kind of nervous about Zero as a character because they weren't sure how Zero would be received, because it was the first time they had done a character that was kind of, subverting expectations. And at the time I was like, why would you be nervous about this? I mean, to me it would have been even more distinctive if we had some new main character come in that was just the most buff, ripped woman I'd ever seen in my life, who was going to carry me off into the sunset, or, but as more time has gone, the more I realized that, you're totally right. Final Fantasy, I think oftentimes with its style, with its characters, there is a great sense of androgyny, but I don't know if we always see that as regularly in particularly characters that are maybe they lean more feminine, or have that more perception of them, or just are straight up women, but like to actually see a character like Zero that I think they use she her, but of course I think there's that great non-binary vibe, and we get this sense where like for once it's just nice, like it's nice to see a character that maybe uses those pronouns, but who, I don't know, isn't like posing hand on hip, like tossing hair, doing the little Midlander run that drives me nuts, that I wish I could get rid of so bad. Like, and there's nothing wrong with those things, but I think that breaking the expectations of femininity has been something that's been harder for Final Fantasy to maybe more consistently break free of. And so it's cool to see that, especially with a character like Zero, where that non-binary element I think is strongly supported in the characterization. So
Right. I think her character, their character even, like that. I feel like if you were to ask Zero as a character if they're a boy or a girl or whatever, like how they identify, they'd be like, not to my knowledge. Like they wouldn't really
yeah.
know. They wouldn't even like have a concept necessarily of gender and be like, I don't know. I'm me. I'm me.
There's a lot of power in being able to say, I'm me.
Yes.
There is.
Absolutely.
Who
Yeah.
are you
It's
is one of
also
the hardest questions to answer.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's also fascinating from a standpoint in the void because minus the magical things that are going on, right? Society, culture, as it were, is gone in that world at this point. There is a hierarchy, there is a power dynamic, but I think a lot of these social constructs that oftentimes are a part of gender, how gender is perceived, received, performed, they just like
DM
don't matter because everybody's eating each
DMV isn't
other.
asking what to put on your driver's license.
Yes, like the DMV
Yeah.
isn't asking what to put on the driver's license. The Void Scent, to my knowledge, don't produce or make clothes. I'm pretty sure that just kind of becomes a part of their body. So like it's
Yeah.
interesting because in that way it's almost like they have been stripped down to just this raw essence, and all of the artistic, performative, social, cultural things that would have been a part of their world, which we see remnants of, like in the dungeon with the paintings and things like that, they just don't have relevance anymore. Like they just don't because of how the world has been warped. So I think it makes even more sense that way.
I'm just now imagining like a really snobby void scent being like, you're not a dude, so I'm not going to eat you. Go away.
That is a really good point, though, Rook. I hadn't really thought about it in that context, and I think you're absolutely right. It's a society brought down to just bare survival, and I mean, since souls can't die per se, it's very odd, yes, but very interesting.
At the same time, I'm reminded of that pair that we met in Zero's encampment, I guess, for lack of a better word, that were always together, and then one ate the other, and I was just thinking, well, that's one way to be together forever. So
Yeah.
Well, hey, it works for Hraesvelgr. So.
Yeah, I
right.
was about to say
That's true.
Shiva and Hraesvelgr. I wonder if that means we'll ever see Estinian get eaten by Vritra.
I mean, he can only hope and dream, right? If that's what he wants
Yeah.
and that's what brings him joy,
It's what
go
Gazale would
for
have
it.
wanted.
Y'all are terrible.
Yes.
Yep. Definitely.
Problem.
What Yazeel would have wanted, that took me out.
Yeah, Rhapsodic says 14 having canon for romance is strange.
Yeah, it is.
It's just actually a thing. Like, there's no way around it. Like,
Yeah.
you have to just straight face say to people, and then a dragon fell in love with a mortal woman, and they loved each other so much that she was like, I want you to eat me, all of me, and let me become a part of you. And the dragon was like, I don't know. And she was like, this is what I need. And then he was like, okay.
And their souls are together.
Yeah, and
And
don't
that's
any
just
of you
genuinely the canon.
don't any of you shame her for that.
Consensual
right.
canon vor.
Yeah.
So
14 is a ride.
Somebody
Yes, it
clip
is.
that.
So, what was the first time, or when was the first time when you picked up this game that you noticed that it was trying to be inclusive, or did someone say, "Hey, you should try this game out"? Who was someone you knew it was part of the community?
I think I can probably try and answer that. This is back when ARR was current. A trans friend of me actually got me into this game, and I think the first two things were that couple in Wanderer's Palace, certainly, but also just the breadth of like clothing that was like not necessarily gender locked, that gave you a sense of being able to dress up any gendered character any way that you wanted to, felt very liberating. And I really appreciated that. It was like just little things at the time, less so than we have now, but it was just like things like that that made it feel like it had a different tone to it than other games that I had played up to that point.
I think in a similar vein, it was the greater LGBTQIA plus community outreaching. That was my first major impression,
Mhm.
right? Saying like, hey, 14's great. Do you want to play?
Yes.
And I think typically I know a lot of times if like, people I know are interested in that, then typically I can assume the game is probably not going to be homophobic or like, that the
Yeah, true.
environment of the game in some way, shape, or form isn't going to be destructive or malicious or
Repressive.
yeah. And I was coming from this is okay. All right. Let me be very clear. This is not a knock to this game because there are a lot of queer communities as well within World of Warcraft. But um, my own personal experience when I was playing, I was trying out MMOs, I was getting really into them. And I think I picked up WoW and SWTOR about the same time because I'm a big BioWare fan. And my partner had played a lot of World of Warcraft.
Me too.
And yeah, and they were like, hey, why don't we try this? It's really nostalgic to me. Let's go through it. And I found that because I hadn't grown up with the game, like there were a lot of things I loved about World of Warcraft and its setting. And I think they've even taken a lot of steps to be more inclusive. But I also found that space initially to be much more, I don't know, it just felt more male dominated to me. I felt like people were much stranger to me, given my gender when they found out, or, whatever it was. And that it was much more hostile overall. And that while I'm sure there are, and I know there are communities in it that are not that, I found it to be a space that I did not feel particularly comfortable in myself. I felt like I was going to have to seek out the niches that other people had carved that would be comfortable to me. And so when I heard, 14's really great, I had always been a longtime fan of the franchise. I love Final Fantasy. I grew up playing the games. They've meant so much to me over the years. And I'd always wanted to play the MMOs, but I hadn't had a PC for a long time that could. And then, like I said, I was playing other ones. So finally I made it into 14. And I think, like everybody was saying, the general ambiance to me felt more inclusive. And I don't even remember at that point coming across inclusive dialogue out in the wilderness. I mean, obviously, I found that eventually, but it was just something about the characters, the world, the environment. To me, it felt more like a place where I went, yes, like this is made to appeal to me and I naturally fit in here. And I think a lot of that was helped by the, community I knew surrounding the game. But also, it was just great to go into it with my partner and have this realization like, oh, hey, we're both playing female characters and we can get married. And I think that was really the first time in the game that I encountered that kind of level of, oh, that's so awesome. I'm really glad this is a space for us. And it wasn't something where, I don't know, it wasn't like, oh, well, you'll have to make a character. One of us will have to make a boy or something. It was
Right.
just, we were
Right.
able to just do whatever we wanted. And then later I found a lot more of the subtle representation in the game, which kind of confirmed it. But yeah, I guess it was a combination. Just the game itself has such a different environment, disposition, and then some of those features I think make it much more friendly.
The vibes are
I-
different, essentially.
if I could springboard from that, actually, that would get into my own experience. I feel like people, and especially women or AFAB people, can kind of get a feel for when a game or a piece of literature or media is primarily directed at men or at cis men. It was versus just created or intended for everyone. I know I've played games in the past where I get that feeling. Weirdly enough, I am not actually an MMO kind of guy. Playing Final Fantasy as they had to overcome my MMO reluctance with the fact that it was a Final Fantasy game. And so when I get into any kind of MMO, because I've played others, I've dabbled with them, I always tend to play from I'm a single player and I only group up with other people when I have to. I've pretty well transcended that at this point, but it took me years to get there. So I didn't notice a lot of this representation stuff. I kept to myself. I stayed with my FC, which was a bunch of just gamers. We were all bronies and such. So it's a fun way to come into the game. And I think the first thing that actually consciously, cognizantly noticed was the Tatharal tribe in Stormblood. And I was like, hey, this is cool. I like this. This is neat. And then I start seeing it everywhere once I'm looking for it. But that was the first time I was like, they've designed this game from the ground up to just sort of be a world where everyone is who and what they are, instead of like, well, let's make some lines in the sand.
Absolutely.
I would definitely say, as someone who's played a lot of MMOs, that like the majority of them have felt like that. That certainly, like what like WoW did, is that there's like a
Mhm.
subtle element of, it definitely feels like it's being catered towards that male demographic primarily, and that it can be difficult to try and insert yourself into that and have it feel inclusive and accepting. I think the other MMO I can think of other than 14 would be Elder Scrolls Online as being one that's been able to avoid that, and between the two of them, that's kind of given me a sense that like I kind of need that now, that ability to just have yourself feel subtly and more overtly welcome in a space and able to do anything you want with your gender and your presentation and all sorts of other things. These games just do it that much better than other ones in the past have.
I think there's room for growth. I would love to see more and more
Mhm.
games with other than binary uh,
Yes.
pronoun options.
Right. Yes,
Yeah.
that's a big thing that
Yeah.
I think 14 in the future can do as well, is try to lean more into that and give people more options for being able to present in those ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would love to be able
Obviously,
to choose they them pronouns for my character, and then like it doesn't bother me personally if that can't retroactively apply to previous
mhm.
MSQ, because I
Right.
imagine that would be a technical nightmare. But
Right. Or even having it
You'd have
like,
to recode at least a third option into every dialogue. You'd have to
yeah,
re-record so much.
yeah,
and then
I don't
also
like
think it's
like,
practical, but I hope someday we go forward in this
I,
direction.
I mean,
yeah,
from a coding standpoint, it wouldn't be that hard because it's just a trigger based on the character's
Yeah.
gender, whether it's he, her, or them. So they could just replace that trigger with a third option, and it would replace all of the dialogue.
The spoken dialogue, I think, would be the main thing, but I mean,
That
there's
yes.
so much unvoiced dialogue in this game.
yeah,
Mhm.
right.
there
It's
is.
like,
I will say,
honestly.
actually, let me ask anyone who's listening and anyone here who considers themselves non-binary in any sense, would you rather have like a definitely different voice? Say, I think they would like that, or would you rather just have to have a he or she pick? Like, even if it
Um,
doesn't fit in, I think people would be like, good enough. I don't know. I'm curious.
my ideal compromise for like, let's take, if I went through ARR through Shadowbringers or something after, a pronoun update, I would prefer that the text be updated and the voiceover not be updated.
That's reasonable.
Yeah.
That's
That makes sense.
partially because I dabble in audio editing for audiobooks, and I unfortunately can detect when
You've
stuff
become an
has been
audiophile.
replaced very easily, or when things have been pitched
It
down
would
or
be
pitched
jarring,
up.
wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Right.
it would drive me absolutely insane. Like I
They
would
would
Yeah, no,
have
probably
that's fair.
to,
actually
That's
turn the
entirely
voices off.
reasonable.
yeah, getting somebody in a booth just to record a few lines to be them,
Yeah.
it would be a lot, I think, and it would
It
be
would be
noticeable.
impractical.
You know,
I
I
feel
Yeah,
like
there's no
wouldn't
way to get it
be
quite the same.
I wouldn't be too put off by having it be a text change only. I would still appreciate it though myself.
Absolutely.
yeah. I feel like
Even
they
even
could.
going to that effort would be like it would mean a lot.
Yeah.
No, agreed. I mean, yeah, I think people would understand. And if you put something even on the pronoun choice, right? Like you're making a new character, you have he, she, they, them, or whatever you wanted to offer, there could always just be a little note like additional pronouns were added X year. You will see a full effect in voice line from Endwalker, like what a post Endwalker on or something. And I think people
Yeah.
would understand, like, especially if the rest was changed and it would still be an effort at doing it, as opposed to
Yeah.
nothing or no choice.
If anything, it might even lean into some people's headcanons of like, I know people whose characters, their wolves have changed gender over time, so it could even like fit in that like at one point they were a he him and then later on they're a they them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I should have known something was going on with me all the way back in Heaven's Word when I was like, "Our
Yeah.
females are too dainty and feminine. I can't stand this. Let me switch to Aura male. Oh yeah, this is so much better."
Look,
I agree with that.
so when you look back,
Yeah, when you look back,
it's so obvious. They
it
say
all
hindsight's
feels so obvious.
2020.
Yeah.
It's true.
Like, and then and just like Heaven's Word in particular was when I started to figure it out. I was like, oh, how did I not see this coming sooner?
Rhapsodic actually brings up a point in the chat, and they say one thing that I don't see appreciated enough is the variety of ceremonies that we can have in 14. Me and my wife ended up having a traditional romantic wedding in game, but I love that they have equal yet different ceremonies for people who may not be romantic or want to solidify a queer platonic relationship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the options are really good. I got married recently in game, and my partner and I spent probably like an hour at the NPC being just like, wait, what do what like
It's a lot
what
of
options do we
It's cool,
actually
though.
want? Why choices?
Paralyzed with choice. It's a good problem to
Yes.
have.
Yes.
I would love if they even can. I mean, they haven't made any gestures like this is something they're thinking about doing. And I think the options they have are good. Like, you get a good range. It's much more than you oftentimes get in any other game, if that game even allows you a marriage option, let alone same-sex marriage. But I would love if they kept adding different types of ceremonies, maybe in different locations or to feature different cultures in game,
Yes.
because there's so much potential with that. And the fact that we have the renewal of vow ceremonies that you can do too. I mean, if that was something where, you could have a small gathering under a tree in a clearing, or you could go to the steppe and have some sort of traditional steppe wedding, or you could I think that would be such a fantastic way to even incentivize players to do all of the renewals and want to, try something different every time, or to even be able to customize that kind of bonding in whatever way they want, whatever context.
Yeah, having it
That'd
even
be
be
amazing.
possible to have NPCs attend your wedding. Oh,
Oh man.
Oh, so
that would be
cute.
cute.
Yeah.
I would
that'd be
want.
neat.
I would
Don't make
want.
me dream.
I would want a wedding hall filled with ancient shades.
Imagine
I love
having
how
Merlin
Cubron
as your
immediately
official-
went to me.
The Ween Wounds cheering you on.
Yes, Ween Wounds. There's a lot of potential there for them to open up not just LGBTQIA plus inclusion, but also cultural inclusion in marriages if they broaden the system, because they could have Far Eastern weddings, they could have Near Eastern weddings, they could have the steppe weddings. There's so much that they could do.
Having
Be
it all
very neat.
decorated out to be different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Do it if even if you only added like one per year, every what you call it, the anniversary, that's a word. Every anniversary could go somewhere different, which would be neat as hell.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Mhm.
Yes, Ayumi, you are.
Screw-
Sorry.
Screw you. Going to hide back in my hole.
Ayumi would be excited to see an Ishgardian themed wedding.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be so cool.
A Halon respecting wedding.
Yes, specifically themed after the denizens of the broom.
Yes.
I'm. Stop it.
I would love to have
Under
an
attack.
Ishgardian wedding where I marry Haloni. I think that would
Yes.
be good for
Hell
me.
yeah,
Yes,
that would
yes,
be
yes.
lit for the queers. And then when you actually go to like exchange vows, you kiss the tip of her spear.
Oh my god.
I'm being assaulted here.
Good. Did you expect anything less?
Honestly, no.
Good.
So I do want to touch on why we're talking about this today, and this topic actually goes back quite a few years, and I've been wanting to do an episode on this since we started the podcast, which actually I think either this week or was it a week or two ago that we had our actual official anniversary.
It was very recently.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're in our third year now, but pretty much since we started, I enjoy watching people play through different aspects of the game sometimes. And there's one streamer and YouTuber that goes by Chili Farmer, and when I watched them go through Eden, and when they got to the end of Eden, and they just broke down, and that's when it really hit me. I was like, wow, this really matters. This is really important. And I want to ask if any of you have ever had just kind of that moment in game where you're like, wow, this is something different. This is something special.
I think I need a second before we talk about mine.
Specific to LGBT rep in 14?
Yes. And it's okay if
I'm
you don't.
confident I have. I can't I'm having trouble remembering a specific incident, but I remember being like, "Oh god, my heart, oh god."
Certainly with the Eden
I know
thing,
it's happened, and I'm
and
pretty sure Eden was one of them. It may not have been
yeah,
the only
that
one.
was definitely, I think, an emotional moment for a lot of people, even up to and including the rainbow crystal was like, even
Mhm.
that was like just such a lovely thing.
Well, I'm gonna be the stinky boy. I don't want to be the stinky
It's
boy, but
okay.
I it's actually really hard for me. I've had so many emotional moments about Final Fantasy 14. Please do not, I mean, like, do not get me wrong. This game has truly affected me and touched my heart in so many ways where I am a sobbing mess, I mean emotionally and with everything else.
I
When
watched
it
your
comes
playthroughs, don't worry.
Oh gosh, I'm such a disaster.
Aw.
but from a queer representation standpoint, I I have to give a shout out here. I'm so sorry, everybody. This is a big betrayal
No,
to
no.
this question, but I have
No.
to give a shout out to Guild Wars 2, which is the other MMO that I play. And I play both and create content for both actively. And I think in a lot of ways, it has been difficult for me with 14 because sometimes, whereas 14 tiptoes around things, Guild Wars 2, one of the, there's many critiques about Guild Wars 2, but they have always been incredibly overt about their representation. Not in like a ham-fisted way, but just in a way that since the beginning of the game, we've had a lesbian couple who are major featured characters. I think they had the first same-sex kiss in game of any MMO back during their first living season, like 9 years ago now. And we just ended our most recent expansion with their intimate, the whole finale, the whole epilogue of their expansion that they released is that you go to a bar where you first met all these characters and you witness their wedding. And you watch them exchange vows of their love and devotion to one another. This was also the same X Pack that we had a main canonical non-binary character that was brought into it. And in both of those instances, I just cried. I wept like a baby. I just wept. Like the first time we met that non-binary character, I cried and I went on a tangent about how incredible it was because my partner, who's non-binary, had just been saying to me, you know, I like playing female characters in games and I really love that, but I just wish that there was an option where I didn't have to be what game developers think gender is. Like, I wish that I didn't have to be this girly girl, or I didn't have to be this hyper masculine beef man, or I didn't have to be. And,
Mhm.
they were just like, I just wish that for once in a game, I could not have to fill in all the blanks with my own headcanon. And then we saw this non-binary character in Guild Wars 2, and then we had this finale with this couple. And I think it was hard for me because when I saw the risks that this otherwise smaller company is willing to take, now granted they are a Western company as well, which is not an excuse, but does play into it. And
Yeah.
much of their staff and developers are also LGBTQIA+. So this was something that was a passion project for them as well. But it makes it harder for me in 14 because the Reen Gaia moment, I do think, is a big moment. And as a huge lover of 8 myself, I loved the parallels there. But I also had a lot of that moment ruined by like this weird, creepy guy that seemed obsessed with Gaia that had like followed her and imprisoned her through multiple lives. And other people read him differently as like he had a pure love and they loved each other equally. But when I played through the story, I was like, that man is a stalker. What is happening? I find him deeply uncomfortable. I find this moment uncomfortable that like he I don't know, like was shackling her to this perception of what he remembered, whether that was right or wrong, and especially when we see the other ancients and how their own perception of the time that once was has been so warped. The Asians in particular, I should say. I found that whole moment and that finale of Eden to be a really mixed bag for me emotionally because I loved the two of them and I loved that they were celebrating, I mean, that connection between them and that ultimately it is their more genuine, real, pure, and I think respectful innocent love in a sense, right? Because they are just technically kind of finding love for the first time, but there's this whole complication with Gaia and remembering who she had once been and everything else. And then this guy that's just there that's been creating all these monsters and naming them after types of love, and then all those monsters just have torture.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, this is a long ramble, but it's hard for me to say because I don't think I've yet had that moment in 14. I've had that moment with the community of 14, with community events, with role play, with seeing the beautiful LGBTQIA plus community that we have, where I have been so touched by what they've done in the setting and world of 14 to support one another and uplift that. But I think because I have had this other game that gave me truly beautiful, incredible representation, it's been harder for me with 14 in that sense because I'm like, all right, you step it up. At the end, they could at least say their girlfand, if that makes sense.
It's a valid criticism.
Yeah,
It's something that they could definitely improve on. And obligatory disclaimer, I don't complain about something if I don't care about it. I love the game. I want to see it get better. Take it as a challenge. Get better. You can do it.
Yeah.
I think Rhapsodic spoke for a lot of us when they said, yeah, I need to play Guild Wars 2, because that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's a
does.
fantastic game.
Somewhere Meowth is screaming.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my bar for representation is a little weird because I know that a lot of people like to make excuses for 14 because it's not a Western company, it's a Japanese company, and you know, they're still working on it over there. But at the same time, I've played Phantasy Star Online too, and when they did like their soft remake into New Genesis, they completely got rid of gender selection in character creation. You can choose like, you know, a body type in PSO2, but you can mix and match basically all clothing now. Like some of it they had to do later just because there's so much glam in the game. But you can be, you know, a quote unquote male character and grab a quote unquote female top, and suddenly you're this masculine character and you have tits. Like, there's a lot more pieces there that you can put together to really customize your character for how you want to look. And coming from that into 14, I'm kind of like, you know, there's still a lot more that they could do. So I haven't really had like any emotional anything with 14 aside from just, you know, the typical main story stuff. Probably outside the MSQ, the only strong emotion I've had is irritation bordering a little bit of anger with the recent event and having, you know, that fantastic, you know, dress the way you feel story.
No. Yeah.
And then the gear being gender locked.
Yeah, it's just like such a tone deaf decision.
Yeah, like I play a quote unquote male Vera, and I don't typically want to wear feminine things, but I'm also like, really, y'all? You have this wonderful story, and then you do that. Like, they did the writer of that storyline dirty.
It's like a so close and yet so far thing.
Yeah.
This is just my opinion. I think Final Fantasy XIV's status as the moneymaker is one of the things that limits it. They're a little afraid to get too explicit. I don't know. That's just a guess on my part, but
I mean, I do look at it as like the game is available in countries where representation would probably get the game banned. Like overt representation.
which is
Right.
unfortunate.
But
Yeah.
also, like, one of those countries is on a completely different, you know, instance of the game than us.
Yep.
They could tweak it.
I mean, think about the infamous cousins of Sailor Moon.
Oh, God.
Oh god.
Oh god.
Here's the thing. It's really hard, right? Because I think we all can acknowledge that from a corporation standpoint, we realize that decisions are oftentimes made because of these exact things, right? From a human rights standpoint and from members of the community, of course, there's always that argument like, hey, well, if you actually stand for these things, then you need to stand for these things. And if there are countries where this won't be allowed, then maybe that's not the problem of the game. And that's a problem with whatever political thing is happening there. I mean, of course, I think like we even talked about 14 creates an incredible opportunity for many people to have a place to discover themselves. And I wouldn't want anybody just because their country has legalization against that or has laws against, anything like that. I wouldn't want them to not be able to connect with the community, to meet people. I think many of us discovered crucial things about ourselves and our own identities and where we fall throughout LGBTQIA+, right? Because of internet spaces, communities, and oftentimes online games that allowed us the freedom, the safe space, and the connection to communities that may not have always been allowed directly in our own lives. And I know I can speak to that with my own experience, and many of us can. But I think there are ways around it, right? Like if there are countries where portraying, what is it? Zombies, but it's like very specific skeletons.
China does that. Yeah.
Skeletons.
Yes.
They're very
Mhm.
particular about depictions of death.
Yeah,
Culturally
because of
outlawed.
a lot of like cultural superstitions.
So like if you can work around things like that, and if we can also have bisexual icon Horshaphant Greystone toned down into a still admiring but far less thirsty and far less overtly bisexual version in just the English localization,
Mhm.
then I do think that there are ways that they could navigate a lot of this, even just in regional translations and stuff like that, that might create less controversy in those places where they couldn't get sales. It's just,
Agreed.
I think they
So-
have to be willing to do that and commit to that. Yeah.
So, Rook, you actually jumped into a later bullet that we're going to cover in a little bit, but since you already brought it up, we might as well dive into localization versus the hard lore of the game. How much of representation in this game is localization in the English version versus actual hard canon lore that's across all the versions? I don't know the answer to this, but as far as as far
get
as
the sense
how
that-
much of this is the localization team for North America doing as opposed to other regions?
For me, it's something I look into. I do try to look at the other localizations. I don't understand Japanese, unfortunately. So the one that would be the most useful to have, I can't do. So I poke at the French and German instead. And I'm trying to remember if I've looked into any of the specific bullet points, and now I kind of want to because I don't think I have. I would be very interested to see how much of it is, Americans are more okay. Americans, English people are more okay with this sort of thing, and how much of it is no, we built it in. My instinct is to say most of it, if not all of it, is built from the ground up because I feel like Yoshida-san is pretty much wants to create this kind of a thing, but I'm not actually
Yeah.
certain.
The only like example that comes to mind of something in the other localizations that is inclusive that wasn't really obvious to most people and is out of the English version for some reason is Mitron having female pronouns intentionally in the French version in one of the cutscenes.
Right,
And the
right.
devs confirming that on the forums that Mitron's
mistake.
pronouns are she, her.
Oh, I did not know that one.
Yeah, Mitron.
Someone posted on the French forums asking if it was a bug or, something like that, and the devs were like, no, this is absolutely intentional. Mitron's pronouns are she, her.
Same with naming Mitron's ancient self Artemis, which can be
Mhm.
interpreted either way.
Yes,
Interesting.
I'm a francophone myself, and I've read over the post, and it is exactly what they say. They say it's not a mistake.
I did not know that one. The only one that I knew was Horshaphant, which I had brought up. As far as like big discrepancies go in those sorts of representations.
Yeah,
But
that
that
is a
is
mouthful.
really
Yeah,
interesting.
especially in the French version, Haurchefant's very much more like romantically inclined, I feel.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Haurchefant says some like overtly like sexual things to characters regardless of gender. Like I think still in the English version we have a bit of the like, oh, you're so strong or so muscled, but like in the original there are tons of videos out there for anybody who's interested that compare the dialogues back and forth. Like Haurchefant is just very openly thirsting regardless of gender and had, I believe, even unique lines, male or female, masculine, feminine, where, you know, he would say specific things. And there was a lot of discussion about that. I mean, there's even, I've got some quotes up in front of me right now, but we started to see a response to it where they said, when videos illustrating the differences between the JP and the English French, DE, is DE Dutch?
That's
That's
German.
Deutsch.
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 German.
Yep.
Cutscenes were posted online. Some fans spoke out in protest, and after internal discussion, it was decided that efforts would be made by the English, French, and Deutsch localization teams to bring Haurchefant's characterization gradually closer to that of the JP Haurchefant over the course of future updates. Moreover, the development team enacted a new policy that all cutscenes would be fundamentally the same, so that users across all regions would have more similar experiences. And yet, after that, we still see something like the Metron localization edit, which
Yep.
granted is smaller, but still interesting.
I think it's hard to some extent too, because like English isn't necessarily as inherently gendered as some of these other languages, so it can be difficult in translation just on that basis alone to really capture it.
I agree.
Yeah. Of course, I don't think we ever want to see. I mean, earlier, you know, I'm like, oh, there's ways they could work around this in countries where you might have to censor. But I mean, of course, I think ultimately what we'd all want to see is just that, yeah, you just write characters and that everybody is on the same page and that they know these characters are LGBTQIA+, and that's just how it gets translated. And that's just kind of the way it goes. I mean, as it is, of course, there is more nuance than that because the localization teams have their own artistry in what they do and how they do it. And I think there are oftentimes things to be said about perhaps sometimes the bravery of certain teams where they're going like, hey, well, I think in this environment, we can put this here. We can be more overt. We can do something like this. And I'm curious, I really wish that we had some comparisons because you were mentioning the Charlian dialogue, right, with all the they them pronouns and a lot of the NPCs there. I wonder what the correlation is with Japanese, if like the Japanese versions use a gender neutral equivalent, or if that was a choice by the localization team to have a more diverse and inclusive environment. I wonder. I have no idea.
I'd be
It's also
curious to see
interesting.
someone do that.
It's also interesting because languages like German and French are heavily gendered. It's difficult to say they versus he, she in French. It just the language is structured along these very binary lines, and
Yeah,
I'm
Spanish is
not a
the
native.
same way.
Yeah, I'm not a native French speaker, and I don't know how non-binary French people would work around this. I'm sure they've come up with something. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, and for the Japanese version, like they have so many pronouns in Japanese as it is. Some of them are gendered, some of them are not. They do have a non-binary equivalent of gender for official documents in Japan, where it's basically gender X is their equivalent to non-binary. So I'm not sure which pronouns they would use in the Japanese localization for something like that, just because Japanese is so complicated with its usage of pronouns as it is. Especially since it gets broken down even more by, you know, formal versus informal.
It gets complicated fast, yes.
Yeah, it really
Someday I
does.
want to learn it, but it's gonna be a journey.
It's a struggle sometimes. And don't even get me started on kanji.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Like, I know that in some cases for gender non-conforming folks in Japan, instead of like using a neutral pronoun, they'll use the quote unquote, you know, opposite pronouns. So like someone who's AFAB might use more masculine pronouns or vice versa in the case of someone who's AMAB, but like It's just so generally fucking complicated.
As much as a Frankenstein is that this language that we speak English is, it's just like I am grateful that we have they, them, and things of that
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah, same.
So, diving a little bit into the weeds in game, how do you see in-game societies viewing and treating LGBTQIA plus individuals in game? And I know there's a lot of different societies, so
I would
Mhm.
first say that Charlene, for the reasons I cited earlier, certainly seems to have a very like cosmopolitan, egalitarian approach. They don't really have any sort of like restriction on race or gender or anything. Like they'll accept anybody who's willing to learn and live peacefully together. I think that that is also probably the case with the ancients too, is that they just don't really think about it. They're just like, oh, you're this gender, that's great, go for it.
Charlians are just academia sexual.
Yeah, basically, ancients and Charlaine's academia sensual.
I
I
know
also
there's
kind of
actually. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, I actually also kind of love that for an academic society as well, because, I mean, as we've seen, there is extensive research and really, really fantastic research. And like now more than ever, please seek out this research into different gender identities, into biology. It's so much more buck wild than your childhood will ever teach you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The diversity of life forms on our planet, let alone even in fantastical settings, right? But this idea that in a society driven by research, by science, by all these different things, I mean, I just imagine that, when authoritative research came out, everybody consumed it in the society because that's how that society is, right? It is the forefront. Education and studies and academia are at the forefront of their society, not just something that is given to a privileged few or that's denied to certain people or, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, obviously, outside of the boundaries of Charlene and all this other stuff, there were for a long time many other issues as they separated themselves from the world. But with that being the foundation, I imagine that kind of research, logic, deduction, right? Again, it's one of those things where it just doesn't matter because like they went, oh yeah, cool, so that's that, and awesome. It does turn out that you can have all kinds of gender identities, and there's tangible research about this, and biology is not always clear cut, and cool, great, and that was that.
No,
They're like,
As
yep, it's
someone-
peer reviewed. Good enough.
as
Yes.
someone who is a political scientist and actually does academia in real life, and specifically queer theory and feminist theories and stuff, like I look at these kinds of societies in this game, and I'm like, I wish we were more like that. That we were
Mhm.
able to read the kinds of things that I read on a more general basis and just be able to like try and internalize just how complicated human experience is. And I can only imagine it would be even more complicated for a society like the ancients, where you can just kind of turn that on and off however you want. Any day that you just wake up and I'm like, I want to be this. I definitely appreciate that they and the Charlene experience in this game have that approach and that academic bent, because it definitely feels like because of that education they've become a lot more like open and welcoming of different expressions of gender and sexuality.
Would you consider them or regard them to be sapiosexual?
Maybe. I mean, sapiosexual is something that has a slightly negative connotation to some people. I don't think of it like that, in part
I don't
because I
either.
also identify that way myself, in addition to being pan. And I would probably say, yeah, like they respect intelligence and find that attractive, not just a laudable, respectful like thing. Like they actively try to promote education and all these other things to make people better people overall, and that can translate into their relationships too.
Yeah, I think some of the only other, at least explicit discussion of sexuality perhaps that I remember just in the game as far as like cultural acceptance is in Eorzea. There, I mentioned earlier the Wanderer's Palace NPCs. So there's a discussion with these two NPCs who are both men who love each other, who eventually raise an adorable family of stabby tomberry babies in the ruins, which is the cutest thing ever, and we love that for them. But they have a little line of dialogue where they basically just say that them being men doesn't matter. Like, it's not even acknowledged. But what they do mention is that at least in earlier iterations of the game, although I think they've eased up on this post Heavensward, interracial relationships were frowned upon in Eorzea. So he makes an argument in this about, this fellow's Huron and I am Mikote. Are we lesser a couple for our difference? I should think not. Sigh. And we see that even in Ishgard, where the purity of Elysian bloodlines, etc., is something that the character Hilda discusses. The fact that, the fact that she is part Hyur, part Elysian, oftentimes ostracized her or, made her feel othered in the context of society. But when it comes to actual LGBTQIA plus couples, I can't personally think of, unless any of you can think of something, I can't think of examples where we have seen any of the side NPCs remark about being judged for being attracted to the same gender. I don't think there is any of that as far as I know. I mean, of course, I think we have our own headcanons. I personally, coming from a strict religious upbringing myself, have an Elysian RP character who had a lot of trouble with his family because they were extremely devout, extremely religious, and his attraction to men was something that was, at least for a while, a point of big contention with them and made him feel different. But that's my headcanon. I don't believe we have anything specific to, like, even a lot of the religious organizations necessarily condemning this, unless any of you can think of an example.
I can't think of any.
I can, actually.
Oh.
And I'm sorry to jump in. Well, I do remember seeing somewhere that interracial relations were frowned upon in Eorzea. Fantasia existing and the ability to transition one race or gender to another in-game is an established fact. So I'm kind of like, well, you have this thing where it doesn't really matter what you look like because you can change it to reflect what you are.
Although that does also raise questions about, like, because you can change your race technically with Fantasia too.
Right.
It's
I
like,
mean,
well, then why be racist if you can just change it if people are being an asshole to you? I don't know. There's a whole. It's kind of weird.
It's murky, but it's still there.
Yeah.
I kind of look at any instances of like the racism thing as being like, well, just like with the Amalja, it almost feels like there's a political motivation in these instances, and it's something that gets walked back later as the wool kind of tries to make the world better and make people challenge those things.
I love that. I would agree with that. And Fantasia's always fascinating because it falls into this gray area where there's a constant debate, particularly in the role-playing community, about whether or not Fantasia is canonical. And whether or not it's something that is extremely rare but present in the world, but only available to those with the money, the magical know-how, and a lot of other barriers, or if it's something that is truly plentiful, or if it's something that straight up is just not canonical to the world, but is grandfathered in a sense because it is a convenience for players, but doesn't actually have a lore relevant position in the world.
It would also be
something-
hilarious if you have to, like, have the echo in order to use it and anyone else can't.
Or
Right.
huge ethereal reserves.
Yeah, like it would be somehow something
That's
that,
my personal headcanon.
that it
Or your light
Fantasia,
reserves and people don't.
right. That Fantasia is somehow activating some like latent trace of your old ancient ability to just change gender, and that it's like a middleman for that.
Yeah.
I would also bring up that it's easy to say, oh, well, just people are being mean to you because you're a Makote and a human, just turn into another human. There's a question of I'm blanking on the term. Someone help me here. Dysphoria versus euphoria of your body.
Right.
It doesn't have to just be a gender thing. If you body swapped with someone, you would probably experience a lot of dysphoria because their body doesn't feel right to you. You're not used to it, and you're much taller, and you keep banging your head on things or whatever. So I think you. Rhapsodic says Xenos,
Yeah, I was
and I'm
thinking the same
imagining
thing.
Elidibus, short little Elidibus, and Xenos' huge body. He banged his head on some doorways.
Oh God, yeah.
Sorry, anyway, that's just a funny aside. But I can see an argument of I'm not going to change. The world should change. There's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. As an excuse for this is why I would choose not to Fantasia, even if it's available to me.
Yeah, plus,
Yeah,
I would
true.
just assume that, like, if Fantasias were just straight up plentiful, like, why wouldn't the tribe races try to get a hold of them and then just all stop being
True.
massacred? Or like,
Yeah.
why wouldn't Hilda
True.
try to change, so that she just looked like an Elezen and everybody was like, that's cool. I mean, of course, this is vastly simplifying a much complexer
Right.
Yeah.
Don't make
issue
me have
relating
nightmares.
to culture, relating to heritage, relating to groups. And I absolutely agree with the statement that I think probably this interracial prejudice literally does have to do with, much like we even see the prejudice to the beast tribes as they were labeled originally, purposefully being something that created divisions, created antagonism, created a sense of identity, our people versus your people. That over time, I do think, as the peoples of Eorzea come together and learn, and of Aetheris come together and learn and tear down those walls, and the Warrior of Light helps that. I mean, yes, I think that a lot of this probably that's why it's not so relevant anymore, and maybe also because the writers were like, yeah, it turned out we didn't need as much fantasy racism, so
Yeah.
let's try to
Not
ease
wrong.
back on that. And
Well, the beauty of it is you can say, oh, we have too much fantasy racism. Player, you get to be involved in peeling that back and fixing it, which is a great, I like that. I approve. I was so excited when we started pulling the beast tribes together. I was like, yes, finally.
Yes.
Mhm. It was
Bring
long
them
overdue.
together.
yeah, but I can't necessarily think of much else in the game. I guess, here's an interesting one we haven't talked about. Vieira. That's one. There are many interpretations of the Vieira gender
Oh yeah.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that at least in their homeland initially, right, going off of the lore, there's this idea that Vieira are gender neutral as children. And now, like, the way that you read into this or don't, I don't know. I think it's kind of up to everybody. And we did get a deeper in-depth during an interview conversation from the 12 creator. What is his name again?
Yasumi Matsuno.
Matsuno, who was talking specifically about his vision for the Vieira. I think, of course, as players, our own interpretations are also valid in how we read into what's given to us. But there's been a lot of discourse and discussion about that. Is it something where the children, I mean, much like we see in our own children, there are less pronounced physical characteristics, and then as they get older, they get sifted into these roles of male or female. I've seen a lot of friends, and I know a lot of friends that are trans, who oftentimes used that as a way with their own characters to, explore in a safer, more contained way their own trauma, perhaps, with dealing with being codified one way or another and forced into a certain role or exiled out of the clan if they chose to live a different way. But we also had, with this interview with Matsuno, this discussion that seemed more of the mentality that, like, the children almost grow into the role that they is right for them, or that they would actually they want to adopt, or that gender is more fluid in that sense for Vieira, and that shifting into those roles isn't so much a harsh cultural punishment, like, oh, you got boobies, now you have to stay in the village, or like whatever it is, you know what I mean? Sorry, but like, or that it is something that might be much more actually fluid for them in the role that they adopt, take, how they mature, and that their bodies themselves might reflect that. I don't know if you have all thoughts on that, but that is one other cultural example I can think of that has had some discussion or interesting
I'm
things
a
with it.
fan of the intersex Vera interpretation personally.
Mm.
Where they're like physically truly indeterminate, and then either, puberty hits and they become more definitively masculine or feminine, or, like in the case of my wall, my headcanon is that, they're kind of just like, yeah, I'm good, being intersex, this is fine.
Stay right here.
I would love it to be like they almost get to do what dragons do, where they get to kind of like choose as they go, and their body suits what they've chosen. Like that it evolves based on what they choose to do with it.
Yeah, I love that about dragons. Dragons are
Yeah.
some of my favorite part of Final Fantasy XIV lore. I think they're so cool. And yes, we
Yeah.
did just recently have confirmation. I mean, not only through L2's quest lines where you actually learn more about the fact that, like you were just saying, their bodies evolve in a way that suits their nature. It's external and internal forces, but that there is some, direction control and reflection of that, their exterior manifesting their interior. But also in recent dialogue confirmation that the ideas of male or female as they are considered in dragons are not the same. And that pretty much all the pronouns we hear for dragons are just how they decided to translate that seemed closest to them. They were
Yeah,
like,
it's a preference thing, certainly.
yeah.
That's a good point. The dragons would be another example of a culture where it's gender's just viewed very differently and treated very differently.
Especially because of how they procreate. Like, they don't really need to
Mhm.
worry about it in that sense.
It's very convenient.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think of
So-
any other examples. I guess the only other thing that's kind of note, this touches on something I wanted to ask all of you about as well. So in Hingashi, we have I would say the east, the far east, in Eorzea, well, in Final Fantasy XIV. We have representation specifically. I mean, like I said, there's the whole plot line with the Aegean merchant. That's the little side quest that's there. There's also the hot springs where there's just a bunch of gay men that are just there being like very obviously gay. So I would assume that it's not really a cultural issue. We do also see there, though, some examples of, I mean, at least dressing in different gender coded garments. I mean, there's the history of kabuki theater, in which, yes, it's all male performers, that, goes back to various edicts that were made about performance based off of temple priestesses who used to go around and dance. And then also when people were like, I pay you a little bit of money and I get a little extra special dance, you know what I mean? And they were like, yeah, hell yeah, why not? Get money, get paid. And then somebody was like, actually, I don't know if I feel good about that. So only men can perform. And then it turns out that men also can be spicy, believe it or not. So like,
Shocker.
has that solved the problem? No, not exactly, but it definitely became its own cultural, precedence. But we also see as well with the Hildebrand quest, the sequence from Stormblood in which Hildebrand dresses up as a geiko. And this is one of the examples in game where I'm always like, this could be good fun or it could be offensive, and I don't know which one I want to put it into.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily get the sense that in, Hingan society, there obviously seems to be a consciousness of gendered clothing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There seems to be a consciousness of it. It's not like we see it just being, like we see various garments just being worn by everyone, although kimono are in and of themselves very flexible, and we see many of them, and their actual shape is not that wildly different, although there are different styling touches that are more gendered. But like, I don't know. The Hildebrand thing, I don't know how you all feel about it. I don't know if we want to say that in Hingashi there is a culture of dressing freely, or if we think that those gendered clothing things are still there, because it seems like he's obviously making a joke. I don't know. I don't know.
Part of it, I think, is that Hildebrand himself is so clueless. Like, he could be seeing overly gendered stuff where it isn't really necessarily like that, or he attaches onto a hyper feminine preference rather than a average feminine preference. For me, just how I take that whole scene, I think it's just very silly. I think it's in good fun. I don't find it troubling at all. I do roll my eyes a little because it's very over the top, and that can be a bit much for me, but I saw it as harmless fun.
Yeah.
Personally.
There's been times where they play it as a gag a little bit too close in like ARR, but I feel like they've gotten a better grasp of like a good balance with Hildebrand, particularly in the Stormblood context of him wearing that stuff. And it feels like it works. With Hingashi itself, it just feels like their situation with gender is just complicated, I think is the best word for it.
Complicated is a good word for it.
Yeah, complicated.
Because
Because like
no, go ahead.
there's there's also the question of like intention is what I try to keep in mind too with anything like that is like whoever, wrote the scene or whatever, like what their intention is. Did they mean it to be like, kind
Haha,
of
look at this
off-putting,
weirdo.
Look at this
quote
guy in a
unquote?
dress, lol.
Yeah, or is it like, more humor because sometimes like drag can be kind of bordering that line too.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's like I try to take it with a big bucket of salt.
Yeah, Hildebrand doesn't seem like the kind of person who'd do anything like that maliciously. For him, he's probably just like, I mean, I'm a great investigator, and this is part of my foolproof plan.
Yeah.
Yes, he does describe it as a plan of surpassing beauty, which is not like,
Hey.
I'm going to do something that's really embarrassing. Like
Right,
he
yeah.
seems to just embrace it.
He's
Yeah.
sitting there thinking, I'm going to be the most beautiful geisha ever.
Yeah.
Honestly, it reminds me a little bit of a section in Final Fantasy VII when Cloud gets made up like a lady. Not
Yes.
exactly, obviously.
Oh, that was good.
God, they did that
It does
so
remind
well
me.
in remake. Oh my
Yeah.
Yes,
god.
they did.
I
It was
haven't seen it in the remake. I'll
amazing.
have to check it out.
I sure hope this doesn't awaken anything in me.
So we know that it's not all sunshine and rainbows in 14, and there's still a lot to improve. So we're coming up on time, but I wanted to ask, what do you feel like they could or should include in future updates to further be more inclusive?
Make
Probably-
it official that Thancred and Urianger are a thing.
Yes. Yep.
Yes, definitely do that. Another
They're
like
so in love, clearly.
a more mechanical thing, just stop gender locking clothing. Just stop doing
Please.
it. Just
Yeah.
don't do that anymore at all. Just make everything
My
fairly
Elzen
work.
needs more suits.
Yes.
Also, female
Yes.
Hrothgar, please.
Oh,
Yes.
but and
Oh,
please
man.
give us like good female Hrothgar, like
Yeah,
not
Char
sexy pinup
adjacent.
Hrothgar,
Queens.
like queens.
Make them like the Char, basically.
Yeah.
I think another thing too is like I would of course love more representation in the main cast. But aside from that, I would just like more options for player characters. Because I mean that's what we interface with the most is our actual characters that we are playing. We should have more options for, more quote unquote feminine hairstyles on quote unquote male characters. We should have more clothing options.
Absolutely.
Yeah, more androgyny just in general
Mhm.
is going to be a big thing.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I mean, like everybody said earlier, I think that adding options for pronouns, things like that, separating out necessarily the bodies from pronouns would be fantastic. Letting you
Yeah.
pick and choose regardless. I mean, like everybody said, I would just like to see them actually have. I mean, we have representation in the game, but I mean, whether it's Thancred or Urianger, or it's Reen and Gaia, or I mean, gosh, it's Estinian and Vitra, like whatever it is, I know that they've always been very careful about not wanting to rope the characters into romantic plots because they don't necessarily want that to have to define them, so on and so forth. But
They've mentioned, and this actually jumps to 16 too. Someone asked, like, is there any romances in 16? And instead of just outright saying no or yes, he actually said that the entirety of Business Unit 3 is not very good at creating romances.
Oh. That's
That is an
hilarious.
Wow, what a
excuse.
cell phone.
Look, we all
But-
started awkwardly writing, or, our romantic RPs at some point. You get over it, you start to get better at it.
But
Not that
they
there's
said that they
nothing
are
like that.
good. They're great at making stories that the players can relate to. So they want to feel like that's something that they can improve upon
They say
instead of
they're not
writing
good
romance novels.
at romance, but looks at Hades and Hippodeus.
Yeah, really.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I just think it would be great. I would love to see it. I think Reen and Gaia, if we were going to pick anybody, to me would just be like the no-brainer. Just,
Yeah.
have these two love each other. Let it be overt. Go there and have Reen tell you embarrassedly or something like, well, maybe we're girlfriends and, but I don't know. Like, that would be cute. And I think,
Yes.
too, it's nice because, I mean, again, when you have characters that are underage or things like that as well, like, we all were teenagers at some point.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that we didn't have relationships. It doesn't mean that we didn't have crushes, that we weren't attracted to people. In fact, some of our interactions in those years are the most vital and crucial to how we form the foundation of basis for our understanding of relationships moving forward. So I think that it would be a really sweet opportunity with them and to see them support each other, as well as to kind of see that parallel of the forces of light and darkness, not at odds, not the opposition of Hydaelyn and Zodiark, but the healing of this world that is imperfect, that is many-faceted, that is flawed, but that is trying, and that is doing everything they can to bridge the gaps that before divided them to create something better for everyone. And I would love that, especially if we end up fully going to the void and we get to see them come back to help play a role in reversing what's happening there. I think that would be really sweet and it would be great representation. So
Something that would be really cute is if, like, for Valention's 1 year, that instead of the usual, we just, like, Feoul pops up and is just like, hey, yeah, you need to come back to the first and chaperone Reen and Gaia for their date.
would be
I-
cute.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking of there's a scene in Bug Snacks which I really liked, where one of these two men in the, I mean, they're not humans, but they're men. One of them goes and asks the other one out. He's like, "Can we be dating?" And the other one just looks at him. He's like, "We've been dating for 4 years. What are you talking about?" And I want to see that with Reen and Gaia. I want Gaia to be like, or sorry, I want Reen to be like, "Can we? Will you go out with me?" And Gaia's like, "We've been dating for 3 years. What are you talking about?"
Yeah. What did you think all those coffee biscuits were for?
Exactly.
Another thing I'd like to see is the option to have polyamorous relationships in like the wedding ceremony, or just like hinted at in the dialogue, having people like have more than one partner.
Being able to be married
Yes.
to more than one, I would like that a
Yeah.
lot too.
Me
Yeah.
Having that
too.
be a thing, because like I feel like that could be something that they could also work on making just a part of the world easily enough without
Another
having it
thing
be
I was
overt.
thinking. Oh, go ahead.
Without having to make it like be something overt that people just like get banged on the head with.
Mhm. Another thing I'd like to see in English, and specifically, you can kind of talk around a lot of gendered stuff. You can, like, there's no need to drive home hims and hers. A lot of times you can I do it in my writing quite a bit. You can talk around it. I'd like to see some of that as a compromise, working towards more non-binary options until they can stick that in the game fully.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Rook, do you have any closing words?
Oh gosh.
I keep putting you on the spot.
Uh,
I'm sorry.
Any
no.
questions for us?
Yes.
Well, I guess first and foremost, trans rights are human rights.
Agreed.
And
Damn right.
any questions for you? Which character do you relate to the most in game? And do you feel like that has a reflection of anything to do with your LGBTQIA plus identities? If you have them. If you have them.
Kind of hinting at. Can I
Go
go
ahead.
first? Yeah.
Please.
Honestly, as someone who's a trans woman, Emmett was so big for just like helping me figure out not only my identity a little bit further, but also like, and I mean that in terms of like being they, them, and leaning a little more non-binary now, but also just like having the realization that, oh, hey, like men are actually attractive too. Holy shit. In a way that was very groundbreaking for someone who was raised masculine and had to kind of claw into this direction of being like feminine and figuring out where on this whole spectrum of gender and sexuality I fit. Having his character and a few others really like reframe that for me in their own ways, and even just their flamboyance was just so much for me, and I really appreciated the game being able to give me that. Honestly, at the end of the day, it's things like that that don't even seem like overtly initially like queer representative, but they give people oxygen to reevaluate how they see themselves and in how they see themselves in relation to other people.
For me, I think I connected most with the character of pre 5.3 Elidibus. I am of the opinion that they took a bit of a character swerve in 5.3, but prior to that, the always sort of working in the background, being quiet, coming up with ideas, solution to problems, all that jazz. I just very much vibed with me, and it didn't play necessarily specifically into my sexuality, I don't think, and my gender identity, any of that, because we don't see much of his exactly what his interactions were like. But I certainly it gave me a fertile ground to come up with my own thoughts and to design my own little universe around him, and I've enjoyed that a lot.
Mhm.
I'm actually wearing my Elidibus shirt today.
Perfect.
Mood. I have Emmett on my shirt right now, actually. Gotta stan him.
Nice.
For me, it was more player character stuff that influenced me because so 1.0 through ARR, I was female Makote. Ended up didn't liking that. Switched to female Aura. That was even worse. Switched to male Aura. That was fine for a little bit. Switched to male Makote, and then that was fine for a little bit. And then leading up to Endwalker, I was just getting to this point where I was just like, oh my god, this is so wrong. And then the trailer for male Vera came out, and I was just like, oh, I see. And a friend of mine was like, are you sure you don't have some gender wonkiness going on?
You know, I
Yeah.
hadn't thought about it until you brought it up, but I started this game as female Makote, and I changed to female Elizin pretty quickly because I found their gestures too feminine and too active for me. Like, I'm a more reserved person, and for some reason the female Elizin, the emotes were the thing that was make or break for my character choice.
They
Yeah,
do
the
have good
emotes are usually the thing for me too.
Yeah, they do have good emotes on the elves, and especially the females, at least in my opinion.
I love it. I love it.
Like,
I get
character-wise, Hades and Hythlodaeus are definitely there.
Right
I
up
love
there.
the Hythlodaeus he/they headcanon.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I was
Mhm.
actually thinking of that earlier, and I never got around to it. There's nothing explicit about it, but he's very non-binary coded in a very lovely AMAB way. I feel like a lot of people, when they think non-binary, they think someone who was AFAB who does not want to be seen as AFAB, and it's just not true. And it's good to see representation of what feels like at least the other side of that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I loved. I mean, oh my gosh, my big ones are probably the ancient trio, of which I would like to just be the filling to their sandwich at all times.
Yes.
Like, I am just obsessed with Venat, Hith, and Hades. And Hith was so lovely because, yeah, I totally agree. I don't think it's as often that we get to see, that kind of playing with the idea of, perhaps a more masculine side of non-binary in a sense. I mean, I tried to like put words to it, but you know what I mean. Like,
It's hard to put into words, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, but we know. We
Where you
understand.
started from and where you've come, where
Yeah.
you've arrived, or where you're going, because it's a journey. It doesn't end.
Yeah. And I loved that because I think that is hot as hell. I love all of it. But like my partner, that's a journey that they took. And like, you don't get to see that as well represented. And I think there is, even within non-binary communities, or even looking from the outside in on a non-binary community, like this preconception of how you really look non-binary, right?
Yeah.
And I know that's something that my partner has struggled with, because you may present or you may look, because of whatever reason, maybe you're just starting your journey and you're not where you want to be and people read you a certain way. That doesn't mean that the softer, beautiful, more feminine, whatever elements aren't also a part of you and aren't also something that makes you just so incredibly lovely. And I loved that with Hythlodaeus because it felt like with Hith, I was like, oh my gosh, so beautiful. Just like, it was so exciting because you
Wow,
don't see it.
Sugoi.
The number of straight male friends that I had that were like actually only like women, and Hythlodaeus.
Yes,
It was great.
I
It was a
saw
beautiful
that
thing to see.
ton. Yes, people like see Hith and it's like, why is this guy so beautiful? And I was like, yes.
Yeah,
And then
I love it.
And then Vana asking like, has your journey been good? And I'm like, you're a wife. I love you. You're great. Dog loving lesbian.
That
energy.
was that moment hurt. Stop.
I know.
Deus being
She's
more
so
like
good.
masculine envy was really, really good.
Yeah, and
like,
also a
Mhm.
gremlin.
And a
yes.
gremlin.
Yes.
Yeah. One
Yeah.
of the neat things about running a non-binary focus like Discord server has been just getting to see, the broader, oh yeah, it's not just all AFAB, white quote unquote women who identify as non-binary, because that's definitely a stereotype that's
And
been
it's just
going
not true.
around.
But
Yeah.
people will, make these
But
assumptions.
yeah, but then, you start, interacting with the non-binary community at large, and it's like, oh yeah, there's so many just neat people with super awesome hyper focuses in this community.
And like
And
neurodivergence, neurodiversity and neurodivergence too. Like being
Yeah.
able to see that stuff go hand in hand and meet people that are like autistic or plural or whatnot.
100%, 100%. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I think it's actually been really enlightening listening to even the fact I'm over here like, oh, are all of us who are rainbow attracted to the ancients? Because yeah, that has been my obsession for a long time now.
There is a strong correlation. That's all I'm saying.
I've seen
There
so
is
many gay people of all kinds who love the
Mhm.
ancients and
Ugh.
like they do all sorts of cool headcanons with their Zems or whatever.
there is the ancient named Sappho, which you can find on a little island.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I
I forgot to
love
bring her up.
I love it. I'm so glad you tossed it in there. Yeah. No, I mean, I love the ancient trio. I guess the only other thing with them is I really love that both Venat and Hades, this isn't specific only, this isn't just specifically to do with just, queer identity, but I think for me, part of the reason why I've been so drawn to them as well is the fact that while Venat might, at least on the surface, be more aligned towards the good alignment, and Hades, obviously, with how things end up, and Emmett Selk and everything there, leans more towards that, I suppose you could say, evil alignment, and has obviously committed a lot of atrocities by the time all is said and done, and those should not be hand-waved. I think one of the things I loved the most about those characters that resonated so much is their complexity. Grappling with things that are not inherently good or bad, making choices and living with the results of those choices, fighting for something that you believe in or love. And the fact that, I mean, we all have to be careful because before you know it, I mean, the things that we fight the hardest for sometimes can make us the most close-minded or can make us make decisions that,
Mhm.
can be read in so many ways. And I think that for anything, whether it's LGBTQIA plus identity or beyond, we do not live simple lives. We are not all distilled down to one trait, one person, one moment, one memory, one characteristic. We experience so much. We live with mistakes. We have great successes. We love, we learn, we live. And I think that oftentimes, particularly in heroic narratives, we believe that to be the hero, we have to always be right or always be good. And in truth, all we can do is be true to ourselves and our beliefs and the people around us and try as much as possible to keep an open mind to the fact that things can change, things can be different than we thought, things can be better, but that oftentimes it means that we have to humble ourselves in so many ways, and that it's never too late for that. It's never too late to have the moment where, as Emmett Selk, you set down your burdens and say, you know what, I think maybe I did a couple bad genocides.
Yeah.
But
I resent this megalomaniacal madman depiction.
well, where you set those burdens down, and even if you go, I believe many of my convictions were true, that in some way I also acknowledge that those convictions cannot carry, the future. So, I mean, and when it comes to anything like this, even for those who are listening who may not be LGBTQI plus themselves, I mean, we all take a journey of learning. We all make mistakes. We all run into things that we don't easily reconcile, but I think we have a beautiful future ahead. So I think those characters have resonated with me really deeply because of that. And it's sad. I'm sad they're gone forever now.
Yeah.
They'll always live on in our fanfics and our art and whatnot.
Yeah, I was gonna say the ancients are definitely queer culture, considering that
Yeah.
Sarah, Neela, and myself all write queer Ancient
Yeah,
fanfic.
A lot of
yeah.
it.
I write fanfic for others and myself. That's just a lot of ancients that are in love with each other, regardless, and are just unabashedly gay, and it's good, and people love it. And I think for a lot of people also, like, even if they're not in the story anymore, they're certainly carried forward in lots of headcanons and stuff.
Yeah, which is fun.
So they'll always be alive in some sense. Through us, they live.
Not to mention New Green Plus, they live.
Yeah.
Too
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, not me spending forever in Catesis, running around with the three of them.
My favorite place to level trusts.
Yes.
But that's just about all the time we have. Rook, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it. Everybody who joined us in chat, thank you. And of course, thank you to the team. I know there was some apprehension about doing this episode, but I'm very, very glad that we all came together to talk about this extremely important topic. And again, thank you, Rook, for joining us here. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, no, I appreciate you inviting me back. It's always fun to chat with everybody.
Yeah, so thank you again, everybody, and we will see you again next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Take care,
it easy,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.